Well, I'm going to start the video with Feliz Cinco de Mayo for all the Mexicans that may be watching me. I guess I will have to translate also this video and the previous one to Spanish too. So far for our tower defense series, I have published 3 of them in Spanish, so well, I hope that you like them. And today basically is going to be a short video, I hope. And it's just remaking the video that I did yesterday. I think I did a poor job at explaining the first solution about tower defense waves for the creeps. So I thought that it would be better just to redo it, do it much simpler and much more to the point. So to do that, I am going to go here to my project. So let's start for the beginning. This is the project that I had before the video from yesterday. And of course I'm going to change it just that it goes directly to Explorer. And this is what we had before. So simply right now we have towers that can be drag and dropped, and these 2 factories of towers that have 2 different kinds of towers. One is trying to slow down the enemies, the other one is just trying to destroy them, and we have 2 different kinds of enemies. Now, the question that I was trying to address yesterday was about how to create waves of enemies. So right now here, the only thing that we have is that every 2 seconds we are creating an enemy of each kind, the Seeker and Seeker 2. The gray and the purple one. So I'm moving this one down here. Oh, I didn't do it. So, I mean, depending on your game, you could do that, and you just can adjust here the time and say every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, whatever it is. But most tower defenses, what we do is to just have waves every X seconds, or when certain condition happens. So could be whenever you are able to destroy all the current enemies, or every X seconds, or well, there are many possibilities. So we're going to check that. Today I'm going to do a simple one, and that is create a new wave every X seconds, and you can decide how many are you going to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to disable this entire event, so we're not going to create enemies every 2 seconds. So in this case it's going to be a little sad of a game, because then we just have 2 initial enemies and that's it. But well, I guess that also works. Now I'm going to explain easily what I had to do. I have to create an event that is similar to this, that is every X seconds do something, start a wave. So to make it simpler, I'm going to create several global variables. So I'm going to go global instant. This time I learned from the errors that I did yesterday when I was streaming live, well, streaming basically, and I'm going to use the same names, but we're going to decide that later. So this how often is going to be basically how many seconds do we wait in between waves. So I'm going to start with something like 5, so we can adjust this of course at any time, so that's fine. And I'm going to add another variable. This one is going to say started new wave. That is just a flag to know if I already started a new wave or not. I don't know if I'm really going to use this one, quite likely not. Then I need 2 just to count how many enemies I want to create. So how many created, and another one that is going to be enemies per wave. Enemies per wave. In this case I'm going to say 4 or 5, whatever you want. So the 2 things that you can adjust in your game are going to be these 2. How often and enemies per wave. So you want, and this is really cool that they are in variables, because then you can adjust them. inside the game. You can change and say like start waves every 10 seconds, and suddenly after the 100th wave you can do it every 4 seconds, then 3, 2, well, whatever. You can decide how often they are going to start, and also how many enemies per wave you're going to have. And you start with a low number and suddenly you begin to increase it. So at some point you could have something like 100 enemies per wave or something like that. So you can change this too. The how many created is just going to be a counter, something that I need to keep in mind to decide if I already reached the enemies per wave. When I start the wave, I'm going to say I'm going to create 1, then 2, then 3, and then, well, I have to compare the enemies per wave that is the maximum. So I have to have it. Okay, so with those variables created, what we can do is just go at the bottom and start adding the events. So the first event, so since we already, well, you could delete this one if you want, but I just like to copy paste things. So the first thing that I'm going to do is similar to what we have here, and is going to say system every X seconds, and in this case I'm going to use the variable how often. So in this case my how often is 5, so every 5 seconds this event is going to be triggered. Now the thing that I have to do, oh well, there's one thing that I'm missing. I am just going to do this wave for the gray enemies. So I'm going to add to the gray spawner a behavior that is called I missed it, timer. So I'm going to add a timer. So this one also we will have to change, and the entire thing is like I start a wave and I start creating enemies, but I'm not going to create the 5 enemies or the 10 enemies or 100 enemies just in one burst. You have also to decide how often do you want to create them. So I'm going to create them like every second. As soon as I start the wave, I'm going to create that every second. And since I already thought about that, I'm going to actually change this to 7 to give a little bit of space in between the two waves, and it's visible. So so what happens? As soon as I start a wave, I have to tell the spawner, hey, start your timer, and start creating enemies every often. That in this case is going to be 1 second. So I'm going to say spawner start timer, and since you can have different timers, you have to name it. In this case I'm going to say create enemy, I'm going to create new enemy, so it's quite obvious. You can also decide that it's not every second, but it's every 2, every 2.5, every whatever. So in this case 1 second. So in this case I'm even going to put a comment here, start a new wave. So this is what this event is accomplishing. Now I have to create another event that it has to do with the spawner. In this case I'm going to say on timer, and of course it has to be named the same thing, create new enemy. Haven't really checked if they have to be, like, if it's case sensitive, so if it has to be exactly the same name, but I try to be consistent, and since I use capitals in here, well, I'm using that too. If you have an error, perhaps it could be that, or it could be something different, but well. So now the first thing that I'm going to do is to say like, hey, I am going to create a new enemy, at least a new enemy every time that I start a wave. So I already had those events here, these 2 events that I'm copying. That is, the spawner spawns a seeker and then decides, gives that seeker the path that it needs to follow. So with these 2, I'm making certain that that this is happening. So if I don't do anything else, I'm going to have waves of 1 enemy, and let's try that. So this enemy is pre-created, so this one goes there, and then I think 7 later I should have another enemy coming here, and it's just 1. So this one goes in its merry way, and then 7 later I have a new one, so it's working. So this is going in the right direction, unlike the video from yesterday that I fumbled a lot doing this part. Now, I could like to be able to keep creating enemies in this wave. What I'm going to say is, first I'm going to add to the variable that is called how many created. How many created. So I just created one, so that variable starts at 0. So now I'm just saying I created one, and I should keep counting to be able to get to the variable that we're calling enemies per wave. So that's what I'm going to ask right after. Hey, have I created enough enemies? And if not, then I should restart this timer and create a new enemy. So what I'm going to do here is add a blank sub event. I usually do it blank. I like it better. And I'm going to say, I'm going to compare how many created with enemies per wave. So I'm going to say system, compare variable, and I'm going to say if how many created is less than enemies per wave. How many created? So in this case I have just created one. Then I should restart the timer that I already have the action here. So I'm going to add it here. So that means that the first time it comes here, well, let's do it manually. 7 seconds pass, and this event is triggered. Then this one says I'm going to start the timer for the spawner. So it waits 1 second. Then when that second passes, it's going to create immediately one enemy, and is going to increase the number of enemies that have been created in this variable. Right after that, it's going to say, hey, compare that one, that in this case is 1, with the enemies per wave that I think it's 4. It's going to, is that less than? Say yes. So then it restarts the timer. So then 1 second later, it's going to ask this same event. It's going to create a new enemy. It's going to add, and this is the second enemy. It's going to still enter here, and this is going to restart, and it's going to do that 4 times. Okay? Now, the only big problem that we have is what happens when you have already created the 4 enemies. Here, if I don't do anything, it's going to work perfectly for the first wave, but then the second wave is not going to do anything. So let's see it. So we wait 7 seconds, and then we're going to have like 4 enemies created. That's the first, that's the second, that's the third, and that's the fourth. And after that, I should not have any more enemies. Oh, it did? It did? Oh, only 1. Only 1, not 4. So, and now the next waves are going to create only 1. Why is that? It's because we are asking here about the how many created. So every wave we have at least 1 enemy that is created here, but this is the one that is restarting the timer to be able to create 4 enemies, not just 1. So what I have to do here is add an else, and I should say that the how many created should be reset to 0, because then I'm going to be ready for the next wave to be able to count 4 enemies again. So I'm going to do that. So first enemy, then we're going to wait for 7 seconds. And this is the first, the second, the third, and the fourth. And then we are going to wait for the next wave that also should have 4. That is 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see that it works. And again, now it's working every 7 seconds, is creating a new wave of 4 enemies. Now, just so you believe me that I'm not lying on this, I'm going to change the how often. I'm going to do it what do I know? Every 2 seconds, then it's going to go crazy because it's going to create several enemies almost constantly. And some of them may be created almost one on top of the other. It does not have enough time to create all of them. So every wave is of 1. So I'm going to say, again, I'm going to do like 10 seconds. And instead of waves of 4, I'm going to create waves of 6. If you see, almost since I'm taking 1 second in between the creation of every enemy, I am making that this number, enemies per wave, is less than this number of seconds that we have to wait. So first one, then we have to wait longer, 10 seconds, to see the first wave of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that works okay. So I'm going to get it back to what we had. So 7, 4. And I'm going to make one final adjustment before we do this. The timer that we're using here, we're saying like 1 second in between enemies. Perhaps there's too much of a gap in between those two. So what I'm going to change here is I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call it time between enemies. And I could go for 1 second, but since we want to change to try something else, I'm going to say half a second. And then I'm going to change here when I'm resetting the timer to time between enemies. And I have to do it in 2 locations. And the result of this is that now we can adjust how much time we are going to have in between enemies, and then the waves are going to be like much more dense. They are going to be created almost right one after the other. And now it's much shorter. And then the next wave should be the same. It could still be too much, so let's say 0.2. So it's going to be a really fine line. And then we could, you see that now they are almost right next to one another. Even in when they're taking a turn, they're kind of like, they should collide into each other, but well, that's something different. It works so far. So then I don't have to wait that much to be able to do this. So I'm going to say 5 seconds, and I'm going to make more enemies. I'm going to make, I don't know, 10 enemies, and let's try it. So first enemy that is right there, just for you to do something. And then you have much longer waves. And you see the gap in between all of them. So I like this approach because it lets you like tweak with many things. So that way you can make waves exactly how you want them. In following videos, quite likely I'm going to change the system, and what I'm going to do is not only to create waves like this and perhaps tweak it a little bit more so they are not so crazy, so the player actually has a chance to win, but also to address a little bit the original question that I had on YouTube, and it has to do with the fact of hey, how do I make also like create bosses, and how do I add a little bit of random factor, and perhaps something like to make it a little bit more complex, like I also want to trigger the next wave right after I'm able to destroy all the enemies. So what happens if I'm saying like, hey, every 30 seconds I'm creating a new wave, but somehow the player is able to destroy all the enemies before the 30 seconds, then he would have a long wait before the new wave starts. So for that, then I'm going to change the system a little bit, but then I'm going to do like some experimenting on my own and try to remember all the steps so the video is more fluent than what I had yesterday. So, well, that was the video for today. I hope you liked it. I think the tower defense is getting a little bit more complex and interesting, and perhaps for the next time I'm going to also change what I do have in the scenario to make it more interesting, perhaps a little bigger of a scenario or smaller items, and start making it like, well, looking cooler and go from there. So, well, again, here's my contact. Let me know if you have any other questions, and have a great day.